welcome, Andrew Murray Dunn, to Illuminating Life. Andrew, you were mentioning how we know each other, and I actually can't remember how we first met each other, but I remember it was in New York City, and I think it might have to do with something around David Savage, a mutual friend of ours, potentially. But I just remember like my initial impression of you was feeling like this creative sort of honey hive of a being that is just constantly stirring with life, that is wanting to animate and express itself in various projects, many of which felt deeply aligned with the types of purposes and missions and values that I feel are really, really important for the world, for my world, for our communities that we're a part of. And so, yeah, I think that's only continued to kind of become more and more of a true narrative or feeling that I've had about you since I've met you and seen different versions of you kind of come into being in different projects. And just, yeah, I just felt the intuition of like, if there's someone that feels like you embody the concept of illuminating life, of sort of bringing life into more fuller existence through your unique way of showing up in the world. I feel like you were a perfect kind of depiction of that for me. So I'm really grateful and humbled to have you on the podcast.
Woo! Wow, that's such a sweet intro. Thank you. And feeling grateful for you illuminating my life this morning in preparing energetically for this podcast. I'm just like, okay, I'm going to do a bit more of my morning routine than usual. And so it's been a really great morning. And yeah, wow. I actually don't think I had even met David Savage yet when we connected in New York. That was, I believe, May or June 2021. And if I remember correctly, it was because you somehow read one of my Medium essays. Uh, I think the ones around Savior Complex.
Mhm.
There's a two-parter, Autobiography of a Silicon Valley Savior and Disrupting Colonizer Consciousness in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. I remember now.
Yeah.
I remember I felt really deeply seen in sort of the archetypal story of your unfolding because I worked in advertising and I was in the belly of that beautiful beast, and also worked I did a bunch of projects for Facebook and Google and the tech companies. So I and then I sort of went on this journey. I left that job and I kind of went on a death and rebirth sort of transformational journey to come into a deeper sense of connection with soul and source as it wants to move through me, after I'd kind of like gone deep into that world. And I also still felt like a love and a gratitude for all those experiences, all the people I knew, all the amazing projects I got to work on, but also felt deeply troubled by a lot of the ethics and the values and the impact that that work was having on the world. And so when I read your piece and kind of felt your own version of that journey, I was just like, it's a brother that I have to meet.
Mm. Yeah. I remember that feeling of kinship of like we had been on a certain achievement path and through various circumstances and yearnings had found our way into these other worlds. And it's been really cool to watch you from afar. I think one thing we share is this mappingness of like diving into a new world, getting a lay of the land, and then translating some of those learnings through writing is a lot of it, but I also know you host events and you're hosting this podcast. And so we're we're doing that. And even just in this pre-conversation, I was telling you about this Pioneers conference, and it's just like, oh yeah, wow, cool. Like kind of trading ideas, trading um, connections to people and experiences. I think that's really great.
Yeah, yeah, a map making brother. Yeah. I'm curious, does that world that you lived, that life that you lived in Silicon Valley, and does that feel like ancient history to you, or does that still feel like it's relevant and alive in your daily life right now?
It's been coming back. I would say I off-ramped in 2019, 2020, and then took 2, 3 years of a bit of wandering, a lot of learning, a lot of rest, and really pausing, which helped me to receive the lessons of that time. And I did a lot of writing to share those learnings outwards, and also kind of tried my hand at consulting and coaching and speaking and um, education, create a course, but it was a bit more in the, mm, I don't know how to call it, just like independent, minimalist, nomadism, even artistic phase. And then I was actually on a personal pilgrimage of sorts to Israel, Palestine, because I'd been reconnecting with the tradition of my ancestors, which is Judaism. And it just kind of dawned on me like, oh shit, I should go to the place where I have all this connectivity to, but have spent no time in. And um, that like lots to say about those experiences, but I was then uh, called up by Center for Humane Technology to come and help them with some of their education work. And so for the last year and a half, 2 years, I've kind of like gone back in. I've moved back to Berkeley. I'm connecting with people from these big tech companies and AI startups, and just being more immersed in Silicon Valley, but in a different way. And right now, I'm no longer working with CHT. I'm working on something new, and it it is, it's conditioned by like a certain Silicon Valley visionariness and and other characteristics often associated with the culture here, and attempting to go about that process with a lot more awareness and humility. I actually, on our website, I I made a little graphic called Vibes. I don't really love the idea of values. I mean, I like the idea of values. I just don't find them very useful. And I'm sure there's a lot of critique about the word vibe and vibes, but like I was just thinking about some of the vibes that I've been intending on bringing to this project, and how, like, I mean, this project only launched in December, and now it's like the second time I'm like, oh shit, like the vibes are really off again. Like, and I can be hard on myself. So I think some of the vibes that we're doing well with are collaborative and experimental and pollination, welcoming. Some of the vibes that are off are right speed, alignment with natural cycles, process as product. So, I think a big thing I keep coming back to in my own life and in the ways I try to support people who create things, whether they're an engineer or a founder and they want to start an app, or they're starting a podcast or an intentional community, or coaching, is like, how do we bring ideas into the world in a way that is more beneficial for all that are involved, including the person doing the bringing of the idea into the world, and then their relationships, whether it's their co-founders or their team, workers, their family, and then of course users, customers, and the different types of commons. And that's kind of the outer expression of the inner process. Of course, they're super connected. The inner process is like, it's like, what does life on Earth, or like, what does all that is want these innovators and creators to be learning and practicing? And so I try to live into those questions. And I also carry tons of conditioning and ancestral stuff, and I'm human. And but yeah, I mean, I guess like every day, every week, every season, every year, every project is a new chance to do a little better and to learn from the previous cycles. So anyways, that's what I mean, where I'm like, oh man, I've been working, like spring is springing. I'm like feeling spring coming alive. It's exciting. There's a lot happening. And it just doesn't feel quite the way I'm wanting it all to feel. I think about the idea of the means determine the ends. My friend Simon says it like there's the ends don't justify the means because there are no ends. There are only means. Like there's only this moment. It's kind of like the how versus the what, process. So anywho, those are some things I think about a lot these days.
Yeah, beautiful. There's a lot there to explore. Yeah, I'm going to take a baby step back. And so you're working on a training right now with Josh Schrei, right? Schrei, is that how you pronounce it?
Try.
Not sure, Schrei, of the Emerald podcast, which I know you're a big fan of. I've listened to a bunch of episodes and really, really appreciative of the artistry of the podcast itself, in
Mhm.
addition to the content, of course. And so that training, maybe you could speak a little bit to it. But I also just want to bookmark, maybe you can weave this in somehow. There's when you were speaking, I was reminded of Silicon Valley, the TV show, which I watched back when I was, working in advertising, and I could relate to a bunch of aspects of it, but one moment specifically is popping up when people get on stage and they're pitching their technology startup or whatever, and they say, "This is going to save the world." And it's just this idea that like everyone that gets really excited about a project thinks that they're say helping the world, that are going to benefit the world. I imagine there's very, very, very few CEOs that are actually pouring their lifeblood, sweat and tears into a company that they know is that they think is having a net negative outcome on the world. I imagine that even if it's a fast food company or whatever, there's a way to sort of create a series of narratives that justify the means to the end. So what I'm curious about is in this training that you're doing with Josh, how are you both like creating maybe a new set of narratives that allow people to really examine the impact that our work is having on the world in a way that can maybe align it with a deeper code of ethics? Or I don't know how you all are orienting to it. These are kind of my words, but maybe a deeper sense or a way that is able to kind of see past the reality that we want to see into more of a maybe complex reality, um, that might not always provide us with the answers that are easy or are exciting for our board of trustees or whatever, our shareholders.
Yeah, I think I heard something the other day. Like there's no one with evil intent. There's just ignorance. I feel like there's a lot of takes on that, like good, evil, and malevolent people concept. Maybe one way to relate it to what Josh and I are doing, which if you listeners haven't already checked out the Emerald podcast, it's a really wonderful kind of novel medium of storytelling, original music, sometimes interviews on all sorts of themes, on sound, on AI, on justice. And last summer there was a podcast episode on AI. It was called "So You Want to Be a Sorcerer in the Age of Mythic Powers." And it really looked at the frantic rush of AI companies, um, to beat the competition, and the the lack of initiatory experiences in modern culture, and the lack of elders in the room. A lot of things that you might be familiar with, but Josh did it in such a way that invoked a lot of prior art from traditional cultures and the ways that they would relate to great power, whether it was new tools or psychospiritual experiences, and how, yeah, for many cultures, nobody was getting their hands on anything that could remotely impact the village or the society without going through these deep, slow, gradual processes of like sitting in silence and connecting with the elements in nature and getting the approval of the elders. So they were held in this web of accountability. And the way and like hearing all this, it's like, oh my God, we are so far away from that, where it's just like anyone can do anything they want to, as long as it's like kind of not breaking the law. And the law can't even keep up with the pace of innovation. And there's like really incredible things about these exponential technologies coming online. Um, they're really like omni use. And and one of those amazing things is lowering the barrier to innovation so that more people can be creative and express that in the world. I think that's really awesome. And at the same time, it's it's a little scary to give these tools to just anybody who might not have that that web of accountability and that training and that humility and that awareness. Because if it's the dominant culture that you've mostly been soaking in for the first 24 years of your life, well, yeah, like you're going to want to exploit the market opportunity that gets you the 30 under 30 and gets you the exit and gets you the da da da. Like, kind of no matter like what the cost is to your body and to your team and to the customers. And I think we're seeing a shift in more people like kind of not resonating with that as much, sick of being sick and just like the always on hyper productivity. But also entrepreneurship is the number one job aspiration for hundreds of millions of college kids around the world. And with widening income inequality and all these other forces that I think just make it harder to be mindful of the process that somebody is going about to bring something into the world. So yeah, anyways, this course with Josh, it's kind of looking at all these things in a deeper way. Like that podcast episode, many people in my life said it was the most mind-blowing podcast they'd ever heard. So we're just going to go a little deeper in community and kind of do this holistic sense making. And I think we'll have a chance to learn some some powerful stories. We'll have a chance to integrate some of these insights into our lives and products and organizations. And it kind of just feels like the edge of the conversation around wisdom and technology, which has a lot of facets to it. And it's not new. I think it's probably something since time immemorial. But there are conferences about consciousness and tech and business and wisdom. Maybe this is just the part of that conversation I'm most drawn to. Or maybe it's that I sense that Josh has opened the door to to a corner of that world, or he's able to translate. There's an opening. And so I'm excited to step through that door together and uh, see some fresh perspectives that might be of service in this time.
I had an image of the two of you, and it kind of had this mythical quality where maybe Josh is serving more of like the shaman storyteller that's in the forest, and then you're like maybe more of the like young I don't know, like the word knight is coming up, but like the protector of the village that's then going out and like bringing the shaman on the back of your horseback and kind of going to the nearby villages to spread the word and spread the message. And because you're the knight that goes out to protect the village, you're like aware of where other people are, and the shaman is kind of off in his own little bubble or something. And so the two of you need each other in order to bring that work out into the world and spread the message, spread the healing.
I love that. Yeah, night. I'm in another course that he's doing called the Mythic Body, and we were learning the Grail story, Percival and the Grail, and so there's a lot of knights in there. So anywho, yeah, I love that visual, and yeah, if anyone wants to learn more, you can go to wiseinnovation.school. And the course is the first link on that page.
Great. Yeah, I was just reflecting when I was 23, I guess. I At that time I wasn't drinking any soda. I grew up drinking a little bit of soda, but I wasn't huge in my family. But even as a young kid, I had the awareness that like soda's not good for you. It's not good for the body. And when I was 23, I graduated from college and moved to Brooklyn and was just starting off my commercial and documentary directing career and started to get these really big projects. And one of them was a 7-Up commercial opportunity, and it was to be filmed in Chile. And I would be flown business class, in one of those like lie flat seats and get to stay at the nicest hotel in Santiago and make quite a large sum of money for this 2-day commercial shoot for a 30-second TV spot that would run all over South America. And I felt so gutted inside because I knew that this wasn't the work that I wanted to be doing, but there was some sort of like impulsive story of, well, I'm young and this is an opportunity and I got to take it because I got to be successful. And this is what, my whole life has worked up to. And, this is, I can tell good stories later. Like I'll help out the world after this project, they'll. And so I've got on the airplane and I ended up going, and at that time I was just excited and I turned on the TV and I saw the documentary Fed Up on the little airplane seat. And Fed Up is about the sugar industry and soda. And it was this really brilliant documentary that was very well done. And on the plane ride down to film the 7-Up commercial, I watched this documentary about how horrible the sugar industry was and how specifically in South America, like American corporations are targeting the global South through advertising to basically cause harm to millions of people. And it was just so, and of course, like I had these warring stories of don't do the commercial, like get off the plane and fly back to America. And then, this other part that was like, you got to do it. You're like, there's no, like, you'll never work a day in your life again if you quit. So I ended up doing the project. But yeah, at that point, I didn't have anyone that I could talk to about this. I didn't have any elders I could go to. I didn't have any sense of like a deeper sense of safety and security with the universe, or with a sense of soul initiation that I felt kind of guided by, that would allow me to not drown from the turbulence of potentially turning down a project like this. So I kind of felt like I was just a pebble in the tidal river of society that was just kind of going along with the flow. And yeah, when you were just speaking about the training that you're doing and the need for sort of initiation and elderhood and all the other things that the course will cover, it just reminded me of that 23-year-old self that felt so heartbroken on one level and also stuck between a rock and a hard place on another level. And yeah, I'm curious what comes up when you hear that.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I think you've told me, or I've read that story before, but it's so cinematic and visualizing you being on the plane, watching this thing with horror, and then being like, oh my God, how am I going to show up for work? And like, you're just on the edge and no one to talk to. And it reminds me of something a teacher recently said, that grace is receiving something before you knew you needed it.
Mm.
And I don't know exactly how that experience unfolded, but it sounds like it was like a real like rich wrestling with a sense of integrity and purpose. And I can relate to some moments in my life and look back with gratitude on how, wow, like if I didn't have that issue or that sensitivity, like where things might have gone, and who knows. But I'm thinking about grace, and yeah, there was now, okay, so this teacher, he lives in Oroville, India, which is an intentional city. You haven't been there, but you must know
I
about it. But
almost went this winter. I was very, very close.
no way. What for?
Just, to continue my map making anthropological quest across planet Earth, studying regenerative villages of all sorts.
Wow. That would have been wonderful to cross paths there.
Yeah. So tell
Yeah.
us about it. I can vicariously live through you for a few minutes.
Yeah. Well, I was invited there by a man who is a former tech executive who has really fully decelerated down to not even having a phone. And he he felt inspired to host this 42-day retreat to give away what he's learned in his lifetime. He's more of an elder. And I almost didn't even say yes to the invitation. I was working, but wound up going. I think if you ever get an invitation to India, seriously consider it. And the 42-day retreat was kind of a limbic reset. He has this idea that 42 days is the amount of time it takes for your small intestinal lining to reset
Mm.
and the amount of time it might take to turn a state into a trait. So if we are being nourished with really good food and walking around barefoot, getting some microbiome and chanting and learning and playing and being kind to each other for 42 days, what can happen? And I actually walked out of that with some big shifts in how I was approaching this new project I'd started, which was loosely called School of Wise Innovation Project to reimagine innovation, education, and culture. Kind of back to those questions I said earlier about how do we bring ideas into the world in a good way, and what does life on Earth want us to learn and practice? And obviously, there was like a slowdown uh, to all of it. There was more of a there was a me to we shift. Like I was kind of going at it myself with lots of project-based collaboration in the works. But on the co-founder level, there had been a few people who'd approached me and I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if we have the same exact vision. And I really want to like get this website out and launch it. And there's like something about like clearing my throat. And I know it can be really hard to explore collaboration with others. So I kind of just like went off on my own in the fall. And then, yeah, a few different things just inspired this shift to get curious about, okay, it's pretty uncanny that you have a very similar vision than that I do. Let's hang out. So I got back from India and then I wound up going on this month-long cross-country road trip to spend quality time with each of those collaborators. There's like six of us. And it's still not easy, but it feels more like the way, or at least the growth edge. So there's the slowness, the me to we, and then more of like a right hemisphere teaching modality orientation, which was already in the mix, like this course with Josh Schrei, Embodied Ethics in the Age of AI. But yeah, more art and story and different ways of transmitting learning to people, in-person experiences, just kind of doubling down on that. And when I when I left, I'm just pulling it up because I haven't thought about it in a bit, but I wrote this on the plane. Um, a few different like things I realized. One, most innovators might be of higher service to stop, to slow down, see the silliness and the violence they're causing to themselves and others, really work to know themselves first. Two, most aspiring innovators, those hundreds of millions of college kids, might benefit from dissolving the illusion that achievement will solve feelings of inadequacy. See how they have a high chance of causing violence and change course while they still have the neuroplasticity. 3, we need lots of innovation to support the great turning, game B, great simplification, you know. And for that, we certainly need a more mature, evolved ecosystem of education and tools and support structures for bringing these things to life. But 4, the most effective innovations might not be technical. They might be cultural, relational, spiritual, or some combination. And 5, much of that might be about remembering and adapting from deep traditions, not necessarily creating new things. So I was feeling really good about those realizations, and now it's just like, 2 months later, and I'd kind of forgotten about them. And yeah, it kind of goes back to that thing of like, we get the insight, the download, the transformational experience, then like, yeah, maybe there's some integration work, and then, thrust back into whatever your status quo default home life information ecology environment is. And it's easy to forget. It's like, how do we remember? How do we remind each other? Which relates to the whole intentional community thing and practice. And yeah, so on that journey, curious how any of that lands.
Yeah, I mean, right before you said the last couple of sentences, I was just feeling like it's almost like we have all the wisdom in the world in spades already available, but what we don't quite have is the systems and the structures and the communities that can help to create that constant state of remembrance. And I had this moment of this flash of the future where our kids are watching this and saying, how could you remember? What do you mean? It's more like, how could you forget? It's like when this is this part of the soil from which our culture grows, and there's actual structures that are both subtle structures of the mind through storytelling, through narrative, through myth, as well as actual kind of concrete structures of like how can we redesign architecture in schools and our education system and ritual and ceremony in order to not just remember these conceptually, but to remember them from like the bones up or from the ground up. It's like it's almost like the wisdom starts in the toes and it makes its way to the head at the very end, in a sense, or maybe it comes through both ends simultaneously and it meets in the heart and it gets lived out through a relationship. Yeah, so yeah, I love what you shared, and I'm curious, maybe both for the training itself, but then also just for your life in general. How do you like, are there any nodes or places or people or examples on planet Earth that feel like they are bringing this to life in a really promising way that you're super jazzed about? Maybe Oroville is one of those places.
You mean practicing more of this, like embodied ethics versus just abstract ideas of?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's too new almost. In a way, it's ancient, but in another way, it feels like it's in a new context. That ancient kind of remembrance or wisdom is being reapplied into a new context, and that context is rapidly shifting and changing so drastically these days. And I just wonder, like, what can someone listening to this podcast right now, I guess, and maybe this is me just projecting my own sort of life experiences, it feels like we're still asking people to be quite fragmented individual humans, where it's like, just go out into this big giant world and just figure it out, and like find this training and find that workshop and find that gathering, and just like, good luck, kid. And I'm wondering if you feel, if you've come across in all your mapping, weaving, and travels, if you've come across any places where you feel like they're actually like applying this in a way that might become the norm in the future, but right now is more of an exception.
I wish I had a more clear, quick response to that. I think that the aspirational answer is that it's something I'd like to create, imagining more of a campus someday where we have a community of practice and it's people who are, yeah, living all that we're discussing right now. But I also think of intact cultures, indigenous cultures that have been doing this for a long time. And I'm reading Tyson Yunkaporta's Porter's new book, Right Story, Wrong Story, just a few pages in, but I can see him. I mean, it's almost every other page he remarks how he's holding those those ways and the needs to survive under like under capitalism uh, because of what's happened to his people.
Mhm.
I also think religious communities, and this is one thing I'm actually especially proud of. I yeah, in my pollinator wanderyness, I've dipped my toes into a lot of different mimetic tribes and subcultures. And maybe the most, yeah, I think the most conservative subculture I've immersed myself in has been religious Judaism.
Mhm.
And it was only for a few weeks over in Israel. But I kind of lived that life for a little bit and seriously entertained if it was something for me. Because I was like, whoa, I've never felt this sense of community. I've never felt this sense of shared meaning, of ritual, of coherence. And I could just hit subscribe to this, and then like everything is figured out for me. Not everything, but like I get all the things that I want. And this is why I've listened to a handful of those Jordan Hall converts to Christianity episodes, which you mentioned being in Asheville, that must be the talk of the town. And it's fascinating because I kind of I I think I went on a similar journey these last few years of like, oh, like what does my tradition have to say about everything? Oh my God, it's really deep. Whoa, like so much to learn. A lot of the things I was looking for here. Oh my God. And then being in the Bay in California, there's some really amazing stepping stones for um yeah, more um California Jews who are like interested in these different themes. This the synagogue that I was a member of last year called Chokmat Halev is someone built it as like um mystically oriented, socially inclusive. I'm forgetting the third thing. It was important.
Ethics.
Well, the rabbi actually was the former head of ethics at Meta, which is pretty neat and relevant. Anywho, it's kind of like what is the I actually posted this in the Meta Modern Spirituality group like 2 years ago. Like, hey, who wants to talk about Meta Modern Judaism? So it's cool to see Meta Modern Christianity as like a thing that people are talking about right now.
Mhm.
Because, anyways, this is all to say that I I think there's a lot of good stuff in some of those traditions. I've since kind of moved moved away a little bit, variety of things, but I am curious how those traditions can be translated as almost an accountability lever for people to practice living and working in ways that are more life enhancing and kind and present and caring. I think that's, you know, sometimes I have these thoughts of like, oh yeah, like we're all just trying to do the same thing. We're all just trying to navigate this mysterious reality as souls embodied. And some of us or many of us have moments of access to that sense of oneness, interdependence, love, truth, God. And then how do we translate that into the stories we tell and how we raise our youth and how we make decisions as a community and how we spend our day, both like feeding ourselves, surviving, and taking care of our minds and our bodies and our relationships. So I don't think I'm saying anything like super novel. It's just like, oh yeah, maybe at the end of the day, I'm just like I'm so curious about that whole uh process, that whole journey that humanity's on and the different ways it expresses itself from different bioregions and animate spirits and historical events and how those clash into each other and then what do I do as someone who's like in the diaspora of the diaspora? Like my I feel like being like next to the Pacific Ocean in the cultural wilderness and still with like feet in more of like mainstream institutions and stuff. I'm like as far away as I could get from my ancestral homeland. And yet like I look over at my altar and like, okay, I got the photos of my ancestors. Like I have a um sense of my people. Uh I whatever. I don't need to go into all the, like to justify like I'm doing great spiritually. But it's just like kind of like a like and there's all the world's traditions online available to anybody and it's both interesting and it can be disorienting. And so I don't know, how do you navigate all that?
I would say um, a refinement of intuition, but intuition is just a word. It's some sort of a knowing that feels sometimes uncomfortable, but it feels somehow more true. So there's like a spectrum of truth, and it's all true in the sense that it's all God radiating godness. But there can be like a spectrum where there's a felt sense or an intuitive sense or a knowing sense that this I should go left and not right, or I should read this book or not that book. And I would say that that capacity to trust that has become more and more refined. And I imagine, or I hope it will continue to be for the rest of my lifetime slash lifetimes. And so, yeah. And to like, they're bringing a mainstream reference for this. Steve Jobs talks in his Stanford graduation speech of like, you can only kind of see the constellation when you look back at the path that you've taken. And he talks about some random calligraphy class that he took in college and how that led to the iconic Apple logo and brand identity that helped it become such a successful venture. And it really does feel like there's a lot of wisdom in that of like just following the aliveness. Like my favorite quote is from Howard Thurman. It's I might be paraphrasing, but it's something like don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive. Because what the world needs is more people who come alive. And
Mm.
a way that this podcast is kind of a way of inviting in my friends and people I respect to share what makes them come alive because they sense that even if no one watches it, even just in the act of coming more in tune with what makes us feel alive in the actual recording, I feel like will hopefully help somehow life do its thing more with more grace, perhaps to use your word. Um, so there takes like a wild amount of faith, I guess, to trust that there's some larger intelligence that is playing out the symphony of all these somewhat random notes that may not actually sound so coherent or beautiful in the moment, but from like a more macro perspective, it has some sort of melodic artistry to it. And I think the prayer part of it for me is like, how like, can this be of service? Can this be of service? And I don't think that has to look like anything grand. It could look like I was just on a walk before this call and all the all the flowers are coming out here in Asheville, North Carolina. And I was just going and smelling the cherry blossoms and all the different tulips and whatnot. And it was just like basically just like blessing the flowers with my smell and like offering them gratitude and stuff. So yeah, maybe that's the most thing I'll do of service today, but somehow I can just like I guess just lean into trusting that that impulse is working its way through me, and that there's some larger tapestry that I probably it's not even that I can't see it, but that I probably wouldn't want to see it, because part of the mystery of life is not really knowing how it's all going to turn out or play out. And it's like you get to be in the maze of existence. Um, so that's what comes up for me. And I was curious, like for you, what's because you talked about all these different mimetic tribes, or I forgot the word you use, all these different little places that you've gone to and experimented in and dabbled with and mapped and weaved. And like for you right now in your life, just to, maybe if it's even only relevant for today, what's a story or a reminder or a prayer or a way of being that feels like it's like most true to you right now?
Someone in India I met had one of these little counter rings. Um, it's like a $1 plastic thing, and all it does is it can count. So you click it, and then the counter on a little screen says 1, 2, 3, 4. And she was doing it to count her mantras for um for her practice. I forget what Buddhist practice, but I I bought a couple, and the thing I wanted to count was moments of returning to presence or awareness, because sometimes I can go a whole day just like, oh shit. I mean, I know I was like having a conversation with someone and like doing things, but was I doing it with any sense of mindfulness or like conscious awareness of that I was doing that thing? Or was I kind of just like in this like dopamine hum steady for hours and like boop, 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 boop in my head, like cognition, like so I can't say the ring has like led to it doesn't work well. It like it keeps adding to the counts when I didn't click the button. But yeah, my prayer is that I and we may, through grace or through practice, find more of those moments throughout the day to just be with being alive. And if we are fortunate and wise enough to have slept well and ate well and moved our bodies and connected with others, then like may we be in a place to act and speak with kindness, to smile at people, to pick up trash, to um, help someone who looks like they need help, or listen more in conversation, give gratitude to the flowers. I'll share the maybe the most joyful moment of spring for me is so on the retreat we were practicing days of silence each Monday, where we would fast, we wouldn't speak, and we'd go out into the world, connecting with nature, smiling at people, like experimenting with what I'm talking about. And I was in the creek across from my house doing nothing. This was a Monday morning, like 10:30 a.m. And I noticed a pretty bird in the tree that looked a little too light blue for these parts. And as I look closer, I'm like, oh, that's someone's pet. That is a that is a it's a paralete, like a beautiful light blue mini bird, like kind of like a parakeet, but like puffier, a little larger. Like that does not belong here. And so I coaxed it out of the tree and took it in my palms back to my house and found water and fruit and like popped on next door. And then it was only a few hours before we actually identified the owners and returned this bird. But it was just such an incredible journey of like only possible if I was like in a state where I could pay attention and like receive. And I think I probably heard it first before I even saw it. And it was so much fun just caring for this animal. It like kept trying to pick off my nose piercing and would like hang on top of my keyboard and my water bottle and be up in the ceiling and pooping everywhere. And then like, wow, like, is this my life now? I might have this bird just came into my life. Who knows? I might never find the owners. And like, wow, like, I've never had a pet as an adult. So, anywho, yeah, just the extent possible, being available for more of what I think, like you said, God is like continuously like giving love. And um, can we be available to receive that more fully and then give that more fully?
Mm. I'm remembering, and I hope I'm remembering accurately, you written a couple of articles on Medium about giving money or other types of reciprocity or gifts to people, strangers on the street. That's you, right?
Yeah, yeah. I had done that a few years ago, which is why it was nice to do it again on the retreat. It was inspired by I think I just had this recurring vision of like, wow, like how have I never woken up one day and just gone out into the world and tried to make as much magic, love, and joy for others as possible. Not to like maximize it, but just like wake up and do that. Like it's not about me. I'm just gonna like give. And so yeah, I wrote a Medium post about the first day I did that in New York City. And it was like the best day ever. It's kind of like Burning Man. There's so much synchronicity, so much learning, so much beauty, so much fun, so much connection. And I've decided I would make it like a personal holiday, which I've kind of fallen off the horse with. But then that was I think it was the fall equinox 2021. So then the spring equinox 2022, I spontaneously decided to do the same thing, but to nature. So it was
Mm.
people, nature, amazing day again. And then on my birthday in April, my body. And so I had these three holidays and I was sort of practicing them. And then I facilitated an event for others to do it once or twice. And I don't know, it almost felt like, okay, yeah, I want to do more of this in my life. And could it just be like I'm an Uber driver and I click the like active button and then I'm like suddenly in that mode, like do it an hour a day or something.
Mhm.
But I found it hard because I'm alone a lot of the time and I feel like I have to be working or whatever. So I can't say it's something I practice as much as I'd like to. But yeah, for sure. Like I give out those "You Are Beautiful" stickers and try to give compliments to people. And I got these gold cardamom seed cluster natural spice breath fresheners that are a crowd pleaser. And
It's beautiful.
yeah, picking up trash is like, I think such a, there's some metaphor here because it's like we have a story that it's disgusting, that like you would never like pick up trash with your hands, but it's there's usually nothing very disgusting about like the little piece of plastic in the park. and it connects you with dirt. Like you get some good microbiome, and then you're beautifying the place and you're feeling good for being of service. So it feels like this all-win tiny act that like we can do all the time anywhere.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I don't know if I ever told you, but I believe that those essays motivated me at the time. This is a long time ago now. I was really coming into a relationship with money, and I did this little thing one day where I put a couple $100 in an envelope and I wrote a blurb about money, about my relationship to money. And I put it in, I gave it out to some people, but then I also put it in mailboxes, and I put it in like some wealthy people's mailboxes, and um in Los Angeles, I would just drive to like a fancy neighborhood and just gifted money to wealthy people. And like it was just, and also to poor people, and like I kind of whoever I felt sort of drawn to. And nobody ever opened it in front of me. So, and I didn't have any contact info. So it kind of just felt like this anonymous sort of prayer or potential impact that I put out into the world. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for that because it felt really at my growth edge at that time. And it felt really nerve-wracking. And I also I don't think I've ever really I maybe told like two or three people in my whole life about that. Um, yeah. But
Wow, that's so cool to hear. See, that right there, that's wise innovation.
yeah, I don't know.
More of that.
It's interesting that I don't get nervous, I don't know, like working on some big project or like doing some big thing that needs to be accomplished. But to go into, pass out money to some random person on a street is like terrifying, or was terrifying. I don't know what it would be like today. So it's just really interesting how
Mhm.
all those little practices of gift giving, essentially for no reason, for no holiday, for no events, just to celebrate the miracle of life and to celebrate love, loving love. It's like it's terrifying because it's so abnormal in our culture, I think.
Wow, more of that. Yeah, just I love the edge pushingness of it, that it's like part of one's growth process. So there's an all-winness in that too. It's like
Mhm.
you're giving, you are examining stories, pushing your boundaries, and who knows, like sounds like you don't have the feedback. Bold not to put your contact info, but like who knows what those ripples were for the people that you shared it with. Like maybe that wealthy person has now moved like millions of dollars more into stuff as a result. And maybe that person who wasn't as resourced in that way, like, that was grace.
Yeah. Who knows? Or they spent it on $200 of fancy cushions for their couch. But either way, now there's nice cushions on their couch, and that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, You mentioned your morning practice, and I kind of regretted not stopping you at the very start and just asking you about that. I don't know why. I'm curious, but I'm curious what your morning practice is on a day like today.
Yeah. It varies a little bit, but there tends to be a little bit of cold shower, a little bit of meditation, a little bit of movement, some qigong kind of stuff, some yoga kind of stuff. Trying to do more right brain hemisphere activities. So I've got a ukulele and a harmonica and some drums and some watercolors at the ready. Just got a flute the other day. And I hadn't journaled much these last few months. One of my growth edges has been I don't know, maybe starting in high school or college. I just had this mental model of note taking. Ah, yeah. If I record the insight, then I will be able to remember it easier and I can structure that information and it will help me get ahead in life. And I pushed back or dispelled that mental model deconstructed it many times over the years, but would still be a pretty aggressive note taker. And I just have been trying to experiment with less note taking and less journaling. But it felt like a good moment because I didn't really know what I wanted to say. I consciously did not prepare for this conversation to just try like what happens if I go in when it's like, yeah, what's alive? And then at the last minute, I'm like, okay, you know what? I haven't journaled in a while. Let me just like, what's going on in my snow globe of life and thoughts and then yeah, I've been blessed to live across the street from this beautiful park. So walk around the park. There's a creek, there's some trees. Sometimes I'll make a tea or a cacao kind of thing. And I try not to get too deep into my computer until mid-morning and too deep into my phone until noon.
Wow.
I try to morning more like creative. Yeah, that's been tough. I'm just really feeling spring like surging forward and so much to do. Yeah.
I'm curious if in that snow globe of your life and what you were journaling this morning, is there something that feels most, yeah, most alive, most drawing you, most drawing your attention and drawing you out somehow?
Yeah, I think about educating the next generation. I think about the relationship between peace in ourselves, peace in our communities, peace between nations. I think about you hear talk about the golden age of Spain or the like I wonder what those golden ages were like. 'Cause I mean, is it like, oh, well, it was a golden age for certain people, or was it more of like, somewhere in this rhythmic pulse of the self-regulating planet slash universe slash like society, human civilization, where like things were like on average like better in terms of more openness and safety and abundance? Um, or is it always both, or it's always contextual and yeah. Is it is it all within? That's like that's a funny thing that comes up sometimes because my shtick with all this wise innovation stuff is like everyone's talking about policy and product design and economic incentives and game theory and like yeah, like all that external stuff. Like we need resources going towards a better way. We need people talking about it, gathering, building, all things. But for God's sakes, can can we also focus on the other 50% that is the inner dimension of all of this? Or is it actually like 99.999%? Like, one could argue that. And it's under represented, resourced, appreciated, platformed, etc. And so that's kind of where I'm trying to play, but not in opposition to the external. um, I'd like to be in relationship because I don't think we can make progress without each other
Yeah.
across every dichotomy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the external shapes our internal and the internal shapes the external. And so it's like this infinity loop kind of thing. And yeah, but I just think about like the Google campus, for example, or the Facebook campus, where you're kind of creating this whole intentional community with amazing food and ping pong tables and daycare and gym and transportation and work that you get paid for and friends and social groups. And yeah, it's like it's feeding this worldview essentially, or this shape, this particular shape of consciousness, or this particular mythology, that and it has a whole sort of packaged ecosystem in which one can just survive within, that is self-fulfilling its own mythic magical like enchantment on the world, or on that part of the world at least. And yeah, my only sense of like what is a new story or a new myth or a new sort of enchantment that we can bring to life, and then how can we create system, like a system or an ecosystem or a community or whatever it is that can live that and breathe that and practice that and enculturate that. um and it, yeah, it feels like all these little regenerative villages or eco villages are like little tiny little drops, but they're facing, you know, um really at this point over 100 years and billions and trillions of dollars of different scales of projects that are still sort of propagating the old story, so to speak, to use Charles Eisenstein's phrasing there. So yeah, I imagine that some of these new experiments will come about thanks to the work that you're doing, and that Josh is doing, and that like there's more and more people that are kind of like getting collectively tuned in to needing to find new external or exterior structures and whatnot that can support our inner development and awakening. And but we might not really see the real harvest of that for potentially generations, if ever, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's hard to think about because so much of the achievement culture that we came up in saw people completing the thing, accomplishing the thing in like, I don't know, 1, 2, 5, 10 years. And yeah, just even conceptualize like planting seeds in trees whose shade we'll never sit in. It's like, what? That's 7 generations thinking. And but there's something really humbling about it. And I think humility is something we need more of.
Yeah, and also in a way it doesn't even matter from a certain perspective, because it's like even if it doesn't, play out in concrete reality, it still feels like the best thing to do right now. And if it does play out in concrete reality in time and space, then great. It still feels like the best thing to do. And so either way, let's just do the thing that feels good, that feels right, that feels true, feels beautiful, and the rest is out of our hands.
Yeah, beautiful. By the way, it just occurs to me, I think we only hung out in person that spring, summer 2021. It's been 3 years somehow. But every now and then someone's like, oh, I met this guy Tucker. It's so cool you know each other. Or like, yeah, I think I know we've like ran in many similar circles, and I wouldn't be surprised if the time is coming soon that we meet again.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. Well, thank you. Are there any closing thoughts or reflections before we go about and this continue our journey through life?
Hmm. Yeah, just really appreciating this opportunity. I had there was a season in my life where I was doing a lot more public speaking, and I haven't lately, but I showed up on my sister's podcast a couple of weeks ago. It's a dating podcast called Seeing Other People. And this podcast just like, yeah, giving me a chance to um, share my voice and practice self-expression. And yeah, this was fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to have you, and just great to be in connection again in this way, and really appreciating all of our um asynchronistic messages. And yeah, it just feels like a little light lights up inside of me every time. I get a message from you, and it makes me feel less alone in the work that I'm doing in the world, to feel so sort of archetypally met by another being, and then also on a personality level and all the other good stuff, good ways. So thank you. Thanks for existing. Thanks for doing what you're doing. And yeah, I'll post the links to the programs and the projects that you're working on so people can check them out.
Thank you, friend. You're the sweetest.
Bye. Good to be with you.